Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this day, for bringing us here together safely, and for this time of fellowship with friends and colleagues. Help us always be mindful of the impact that our practices have on the local economy, and that we best serve the marketplace by following your greatest commandments. That is to love you and to love our neighbor as ourselves. We pray for blessings and guidance upon our newly elected leaders, and ask that you would give them the wisdom to govern justly and selflessly. We pray for peace in this world and comfort for those who are hurting. As we approach the holiday season, we ask that you would give us a heart of compassion for those who are in need. Lastly, Father, we lift up to you our friend and colleague, Scott Seelig. We pray for healing for Scott and for comfort and encouragement for Scott and his family during this most challenging of times. We give you thanks for this food and for the hands that prepared it. In Christ's name, amen. Amen. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, everyone, enjoy your meal, and we'll be back with you shortly.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and jump in with the program, but please continue eating, enjoy your meal, and we're going to get the program started to get our speaker up here and to stay strict to our time today to respect everyone's schedule. So again, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for being here, especially our table sponsors and obviously the individual sponsors here today. Without the continued support of so many of you, an event of this magnitude is just not possible. So would like to thank you. And I think Kelly just told me we have nearly 300 registered for today's event. So just thank you so much. For our guest who's not really familiar with, what is CCIM? Who are we? Who is the Georgia chapter? CCIM stands for Certified Commercial Investment Member. We are a commercial real estate association that brings together some of Georgia's best and finest talent in our profession. We bring together networking events, behind-the-scene access to developments, trends and practices, and most importantly, what we do is educational opportunities. The Georgia CCIM chapter was established in 1972 to promote professionalism in the commercial investment brokerage industry through nearly education. We have 350 nearly active members, and they're in all aspects of the commercial real estate, rather institutional or general brokerage, and then major concerns such as law, accounting, and appraisal. Here at our chapter, we have a very simple mission, and it's simply to promote technology, networking, and then education of our members and our candidates seeking the designation. And with that, an organization of this magnitude is really not possible without solid leadership. I've been blessed over my short tenure here with the chapter to get encouragement from so many of our past presidents, and without their leadership, our chapter would not be recognized as one of the top chapters in the United States and in the nation and the CCIM Institute. So with that, real quick, I'd like to recognize each of our past presidents. So our past presidents, would you please stand? And again, because of their commitment is why I have the privilege of standing here before you today. So guys, gals, thank you so very much. And with that said, I'm proud to go ahead and introduce our 2017 Executive Committee and officers. Guys, when I call your name, just please stand, and at the end we'll give you your much due applause. Jason Holland, Secretary Treasurer. Richard Slayton, our 2018 President-elect. And finally, your 2017 Chapter President, Andrew Joyner. So, and also, none of this is possible without our committees and directors. So all of our board of directors for 2017, please stand up. Again, thank you guys and gals for your commitment to making our chapter what it is today. And at this time, we had the special privilege of hosting the 2017 or 2016 Thrive and national meetings here in Atlanta. And what that means is twice a year we give the exam. The exam is given, and the candidates who have gone through the long, grueling process of the education, the transactions, and all the electives, they finally get to sit for what is a very fun exam. And that was held here in Atlanta on October 26th. And what I'd like to do, we have a few in the crowd today, not all of them, but what I'd like to do is call each of their names, recognize them, and when I do call your name, please stand, and at the end, we'll give you your round of applause. Daniel Bennett, Shane Brownlee, Jeremiah Jarman, Ben Johnson, Renew Law, Rocky Moore, Marcy Moats, Hilliard Parker, Blair Schultz, Daniel Wintergarten, and finally John Woodham. So if we could, just congratulations. 2016 has been another fabulous year for our chapter. We've had 6 dynamic programs, including a social and networking event that we just held at the SunTrust Field. A lot of fun seeing what was going on and how they're going to fix those traffic woes over there. We'll see. We've also held numerous educational opportunities, as we do every year for our chapters. As I said, we had the CCIM Thrive Conference here, and we capped it off with a very, from what we've heard, in my opinion, a very successful networking event at the College Football Hall of Fame. Again, we had over 300 people there from all across the country and the globe. CCIM is a global institute, so there's a lot of fun. And none of this, the events that we do, the programs that we do, the networking event that we do each and every year, the reason the caliber of these events are so high is because of our ongoing sponsors to our chapter. And at this time, I would like to recognize and just say thank you so very dearly to each and one of our long-term sponsors. And I think Kelly's got their name. So please, if our sponsors are here, please stand so we can recognize you. This past Friday, we had the privilege of honoring and celebrating our Veterans Day. Without the dedication and many sacrifices of our servicemen and women, we would definitely not enjoy the freedoms and liberties that we take for granted today. So with that, I'd like to have our veterans stand in the audience so we can show you our gratitude. Thank you so much for your humble service to our country. And at this time, Andrew, come up and join me, please. We're going to do our President's Award. Last year, the membership and the executive committee got together and decided that because of the strength of our organization and our chapter, we really need to go about recognizing those chapter members that go above and beyond. And as one of the leading chapters in the nation, we are truly blessed with talented and hardworking individuals within our membership. The President Award seeks to recognize members who show extreme commitment, leadership in all aspects of his or her life, and a deep commitment to CCIM and the professional standards which we hold dearly. This year's recipient fulfills these requirements to a T. This year's recipient has served and volunteered in numerous capacities for the Atlanta Commercial Board, CCIM Georgia Chapter, CCIM Institute, and way too many local organizations that it'd take me all day to announce. This individual has dedicated his life to the career of helping others and giving of his time without hesitation. To fully recognize the impact of this year's recipient has had on our profession and community, it's just not possible for me to name it all. So with that said, it is with great honor for me to stand here with Andrew to announce this year's winner, Mr. Bill Adams. Bill. Come on up, Bill. Should have put you up front, Bill. I'm sorry. Come on, sir. I love you both tied, but Bill, with that said, it is our honor to present you with a small token of appreciation. So.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, I'm almost done. I know everybody wants me to shut up and get Mr. Doggett up here, so we're close. I do want to point out one other special individual that's in the audience with us today. This individual has served our industry, our profession, and our community for 25 plus years. and she just announced that she will be stepping down from a position that she's created and made her own, and probably shoes so big that will never be filled. And I think she's sitting right there next to Paul Ossie. Kristen Lamb, would you please stand up? Kristen, I just want to say congratulations on your next course of life. Your daughter's beautiful. I've seen her, met her, so just congratulations and thank you for the service to our industry. Okay, with that said, we're going to go ahead and get our program. I'm right on time. It's a great honor to introduce Mr. John Doggett, our keynote speaker this afternoon. Mr. Doggett is an award-winning senior lecturer at the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. He is faculty advisor to UT's Adam Smith Society and academic director of UT Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders of Business and Entrepreneurship Institute. In 2004, Joe co-founded UT's Idea to Product, global commercialization competition. John's focus is on competition, entrepreneurship, sustainable energy. He has worked with entrepreneurship, energy, high-tech, manufacturing, natural resources, consumer product firms in Asia, Europe, and the United States. John was a competitive strategy consultant with McKinsey & Company in Washington, D.C. and Copenhagen, Denmark. He created an international economic development consulting firm that helped clients in 25 countries develop and implement strategies to become more market-oriented and competitive. John also co-founded a Spanish-language TV sports programming company that just signed a 3-year exclusive deal with NFL. Can't wait to hear about that one. John received his BA from Claremont Men's College, his JD from Yale Law School, his MBA from Harvard, and without further hesitation, please welcome Mr. John Doggett. Thank you, sir. That was a long list. It was.
Thank you. It's good to be back. I was here a couple of years ago, and I'm surprised you invited me back here, but what the heck, I'm glad to be here. Flew in last night. You do have the most busy airport on the planet. It's just amazing. And late at night, all the planes taking off. Well, when we were talking about my coming back, we had a couple of dates, and one was before the election, and the other one was after the election. And before I do anything, I'm taking my timer off, because I want to make sure we have time to do Q&A. And we decided to do it after the election. And that was a great decision, because there's so much to talk about. You know, I was born and raised in California, and I always like coming to places in the South where we pledge allegiance to the flag instead of burn the flag. It's really an important thing for me. And so what I want to do, I'm going to talk about some observations I have first about the election and the implications they have on the economy. Then I have some more data about the economy. And then if we do it right, we'll have at least 15 minutes for Q&A, and some of your members have already buttonholed me and had some really good questions and questioned some of my data, which is wonderful. I love that, so I'm not afraid of that. There's a concept that's really important. It's called a strategic inflection point. Andy Grove was the first person who talked about it significantly back in 1995 in his book, Only the Paranoid Survive. But strategic inflection point is something that you will understand in your industry. You're in real estate, and so we know there's cycles in real estate. A strategic inflection point is not a cycle. It is when the world as we know it has changed, and it's a fundamental change, there's no going back. For example, pantyhose, strategic inflection point. If you're a woman and you remember girdles, once you had a pantyhose, who would want a girdle? Oh, you guys are too young. You don't know what that is. You might think you're young. I'll make you feel old right now. Every university and college across America is interviewing kids to be freshmen next year. Kids who were born in 1999. Born in 1999. Which means next year they're going to be kids born in 2000, which means they won't have any idea of the 20th century except for what they see on YouTube. If that doesn't make you feel old, I can keep going. But the key thing about a strategic inflection point is to understand that it is real, it is permanent, and the benefits are there to those who recognize it and don't fight it. The disadvantages are there, those who refuse to acknowledge that the changes happen. And this election was a strategic inflection point. The second thing, and this is something that sadly I'm best known for this, ugly baby glasses. We've all seen ugly babies. We've all seen them. I'm looking around the room. We've all seen ugly babies, right? I'm not going to focus on anybody. And we know what we tell a parent when they have an ugly child and they're carrying an ugly child. What do we say? What a cute little baby, right? And what do we think? Oh my goodness, I hope it looks better when it grows up. And in fact, this picture is really kind of interesting because after a talk I gave to the American Association of Chamber of Commerce executives, a woman came up and said, Professor Doggett, you don't have to use this picture anymore. You can use the picture of my daughter because she was really ugly. She looks good now. I said, dear, even with your signed permission, nobody would believe that a mother would give me that picture, so I'm going to stick with this. In business, though, and that's what we're in, you have to have ugly baby glasses. And what are ugly baby glasses? You look at data, you see what it is, you understand it for what it means, even if you don't like what it tells you. And then you decide what you're going to do about it. And what do we know? Most companies, most individuals, we have our value glasses. So these are ugly baby glasses. They're clear, in my case it's corrected, and I can see what's going on. And here are our value judgment glasses. These are kind of really cool. I can tell you this crowd looks a lot better with these glasses on. Okay? But if you make the mistake of wearing these first and trying to translate data with these, you're going to miss things. Like this election. All the experts were wrong. Like Brexit, all the experts were wrong. And they need not have been wrong, and I'll share a little data with you, if they had looked at the data objectively. But that's really hard for us to do. And the advantages for us as business people is that if we can look at data objectively, guess what happens? We can see things that other people don't want to see because they don't like what the data shows. So here's the first example of it. Bernie and Donald are fraternal twins. They come from the same parents. And those parents are American voters who are completely frustrated with the political system, with the Democrat and Republican Party. Fraternal twins. Same parents. And the data supports that analysis. We'll start off with a true Trump supporter, Elizabeth Warren. This is her quote 2 days after the election to the AFL-CIO. This is Elizabeth Warren. For those of you in the back who cannot read it, there are many millions of people who did not vote for Donald Trump because of bigotry and the hate that fueled his campaign. They voted for him despite the hate. They voted for him out of frustration and anger and also out of the hope that he would bring change. We know what Elizabeth was saying about the Donald before the election, but she put on her ugly baby glasses and said, we got our you-know-it's kicked. Why? And as she started to look at the data, she realized, oh my. The second quote about Donald Trump is from Bernie Sanders. You'd not expect a positive Trump comment about from Bernie Sanders. But again, for those of you in the back, Donald Trump won the White House because his campaign rhetoric successfully tapped into a very real justified anger, and anger that many traditional Democrats feel. I am saddened, but not surprised by the outcome. It is no shock to me that millions of people who voted for Mr. Trump did so because they're sick and tired of the economic, political, and media status quo. I was not surprised. All the experts were surprised. And then Bernie even tweeted, to make sure you got his point, he tweeted this. This is Bernie Sanders. I come from the white working class, and I'm deeply humiliated that the Democratic Party cannot talk to the people from where I came from. This is what a strategic inflection point looks like. You had a campaign where Donald was described as the least qualified person ever to run for president, and then the people who were doing that took off their value judgment glasses and said, he picked up on something that's really important. So what did he pick up on? So let's start talking about economic data. This is data about non-farm manufacturing jobs from 1996 to 2016. This is in the Wall Street Journal on the 11th of this month. And what you see is a steady trend going in the wrong direction. These jobs are disappearing. It doesn't look like it's that much, except these are the jobs that were at the heart of the middle class in those states that tipped against Hillary and for Donald. The data is very clear. The trend line is very clear. And if you looked at the data with ugly baby glasses, you shouldn't have been surprised at the anger and the angst in the communities that eventually voted for Trump. Here's another data point. Americans 16 years and older who are not working from 1996 to 2016. It's gone from about 65 or 71.8 million in 2001 to 95 million people. These are people 16 years and older who are not in the workforce. How can that be a status quo that you want to maintain, that you want to preserve? Third slide. Labor force participation rates. Peaked in 2003 at 66.5%. Now it's under 63%. We're at a labor force participation rate, the number of people who are of working age who are working, that's similar to what it was in the mid-1970s. 1970s. You look at this data, there is a severe problem that the politicians were not addressing, with the exception of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. And if you look at the WikiLeaks emails from the DNC, it's obvious that the Democrats were doing everything they can. Well, the DNC was doing everything they can to prevent Bernie from being the candidate. And one of the questions is, if Bernie had been the candidate, would there have been the enthusiasm gap that there was for Hillary? Probably not. Who knows? He might have gotten elected, but he didn't. And this is what happened. These are states that went for Obama in 2012 that ended up, or counties that ended up going for Donald Trump. And we're looking at a vote shift. Light green is negative 20. Dark green is positive 40. All across this country. And here's one of the messages of this election. In Pennsylvania, in Ohio, and in Michigan, which were key states that tipped for Donald Trump, voters who had voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012 overwhelmingly switched their vote for Donald Trump. That's not what you expect. That's not what you hear. That's what the data shows. Whether you like it or not, here's the thing about data. It's not about liking. It's about is. And then deciding what you're going to do with it. Another data point. Exit polls from CNN after 2012 and then 2016. Turns out that Donald Trump got 1 percentage point more African American votes than Mitt Romney. Got 2 percentage points more Latino votes than Mitt Romney. And did the same with people 18 to 29 as Hillary Clinton. That's the data. So now you start to understand why it's important to really look at what the data says, because if we listen to the news media, there's a whole bunch of stuff coming out that sounds nice, except it's just not factually true. And think about your industry. Think about your business. If you try to sell real estate or support real estate or build condominiums or office buildings or warehouses and you don't take advantage of the actual data, somebody's going to come looking for you and they're going to do something bad to you. So you're in the business where data has to be the driver. Second, we're almost done with politics. We've heard about people being afraid for their lives because Donald Trump was elected, but if you look at the data, almost as many people were afraid for their lives if Hillary had been elected. Almost as many. We haven't heard that. The data's there. This is from that nice left-wing organization called CNN. It's not left-wing. I know you're Atlanta. I'm just kidding. Nobody liked that joke. Okay, I'll try another bad joke. Yeah, I got a bunch of bad jokes, but I'm not going to do it. And then I have even some data about Georgia. In Georgia, over a quarter of the electorate was angry at the federal government, and 41% were dissatisfied. They favored Trump by 71% to 17%, and 51 to 41%. Had nothing to do with being racist. Had nothing to do with being crazy, with being anti-Muslim. It had everything to do with looking at this economy, looking at our government, saying things are going in the wrong direction. We're going to vote for the person that says he's going to try to do something about it. Now, what the Donald will be able to do, time will tell. I know he's going to try hard. Hopefully, for our country's sake, he is successful. But if he's not successful, somebody else will come. But this is a strategic inflection point election, and it has significant economic implications. And I'll end my election comments with the final slide. The voters were sending a message, can you hear us now? There's another version of the slide that was not appropriate for public consumption, but it's the same concept, which is, can you hear us now? We are frustrated. We are not happy. We want our government to be more responsive to our needs. Why? We are in an economic rebound from 2007, 2008, 2009. But if you look at the data, it is the slowest, least robust economic rebound since the end of World War II. And hopefully it continues. The evidence suggests that it's going to continue, but it's somewhat anemic. If you look at the data, business spending for private non-residential fixed investment adjusted for inflation is starting to flatten out. My assumption is people were waiting to see who was going to be elected because there's some minor implications about who was elected president in terms of what they were saying. My expectation is that you're going to start to see an increase in investment. People believe that there's going to be a more business-friendly government in Washington, D.C., that regulations are going to be reduced. If you're in the energy space, and I do a lot of work with energy companies, they know that the clean power plant is going to be dismantled. And so they believe that there's a great opportunity for the business community to have a more robust environment. And I'm hoping that is true. I come from Texas now. I've been in Texas for almost 3 decades. And we just discovered yet a new shale play that has, 60 billion barrels of oil equivalent, the largest oil reserves found in this country so far. And so what does that mean? If you are concerned about climate change and greenhouse gases, we have fallen off the table in terms of our production because more and more companies have moved to natural gas. And our natural gas resources are so large, that's going to continue. The implications for you is make sure your people understand that an investment in natural gas for heating and cooling and for hot water is really a good decision. And maybe you're in Texas like I am and you have a lot of solar, but if you don't have solar, natural gas is the next best way to go because the price of natural gas is going to stay relatively stable for a long period of time because we just have so much of it now. Exports have been going up, but they've been slowing. They've been flattening out, plateauing. Most of us believe that as the country, as the business community gets comfortable with an administration that is business friendly, we'll see an increase in exports. Now we have a minor problem, and that is that the dollar is the strongest it's been in 18 years. It's a problem if you're an exporter, but if you ever want to take a vacation, this is the best time to take a vacation overseas. In fact, my wife and I, after Brexit, we went to Scotland for 2 weeks because our dollar went 35% more than it would have gone the week before Brexit. And what we found is that the UK is not dying. They're fine. If you listen to the press, they're dying. Everything is falling apart. Nothing's falling apart. And they were happy to see us. We were happy to be there. But this trend is not a new trend. Mary Meeker works for Kleiner Perkins. She's every year in June issues a report on the state of the economy and the state of the internet. You can go to her website and pick it up. It's only about 265 PowerPoint slides long. But it's really good stuff, and I only have a few parts of it because she does good work. She has good people supporting her. And one of the things she's talked about is we're looking at a systemic downturn in global trade. And all the data that I see supports that global trade is changing. One of the big reasons is that China is changing how it's growing its economy. China is moving from a manufacturing, export-based economy to a domestic consumption-based economy. And as they're doing that, they're starting to shed manufacturing plants. My wife and I were going to Vietnam, we're flying from Guangzhou a few years ago. My wife is Chinese, so she speaks Mandarin. I do not. I've tried. It hurts. I've tried. It hurts. And I won't go into that either. But she said all the people flying from Guangzhou in southern China to Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon were business people talking about the factories that they'd moved from southern China to Vietnam. As you heard on the academic advisor to the Mandela Young African Entrepreneurs Program, the branch we have in Austin, fastest growing economy in Africa is Ethiopia. Why is it growing fast? Because there are a lot of Chinese manufacturing factories that are moving to Africa with Ethiopia as the number one choice. So there's a lot going on, but it's changing the nature of our economy. And what that means is that if we're going to be competitive and balance our budget, balance our trade deficit, we have to manufacture things that the world wants and things that are more expensive than Snapchat. Commodity prices, as we know, have fallen. They may trend up a little. This is from June, but not very much. Why? Because as China becomes more inwardly focused, as they don't export as much, as the Europeans continue to do what they do very well, which is to screw things up, the world economy will not have the appetite for commodities, raw materials that it's had in the past. If you look at the impact that's had on some countries, Brazil is a perfect example. The largest exporter of iron ore is in a deep recession, on the verge of the depression. They've impeached their president because their number one export partner, China, has reduced imports from Brazil by 35%. That's a big number. One of the tools I use to look at what's going on is to look at the price of shipping containers, because that's something that governments typically can't play around with. If you look at the data, it is stunning. For the price of a really nice dinner for you and your loved one in Atlanta, you can ship a full container from China to Europe. And the break even is $1,400. And so there are a lot of projects that are falling apart because of this, and it's not going to change. What we know is that major shipping companies are either scuttling projects, they're not buying the new ships that they contracted to, or they're taking relatively young container ships and they're sending them to the scrapyard. They're aggressively trying to reduce capacity because, again, China is not manufacturing for export as much as they used to. Much of what we need we can produce here, and the good news, there are factories returning to the United States because of robotics and artificial intelligence. I'll talk about that. So we can make more and more here, more and more on the border with Mexico. And if you're in the shipping business, it's not good. For those of you who have warehouses that were dealing with stuff that was being imported, I'd look at these numbers. I'd look at them very carefully, because the data suggests this trend is not going to change anytime soon until a lot of capacity is taken out of the system. The Chinese were starting a major new canal in Nicaragua at the beginning of this year. That canal is now on hold. It was going to be twice the size of the newly enlarged Panama Canal. That canal is now on hold. It doesn't make sense because the Panama Canal has more capacity than it needs. Part of what was happening that we took for granted was that the Chinese were going nuts and spending with capital equipment to increase their capacity to be able to export. We have not seen, hopefully this works, we have not seen numbers like this from a major economy ever. But look at the trend line. It's flattening out. There used to be a time when if America sneezed, the whole world caught a cold. We've just finished an era where if China sneezed, the whole world caught a cold. The good news is, because again of the slowing economy in China and the problems that the Europeans are having, the United States is the only safe haven for a ton of money and for entrepreneurs. And so our economy has this unnaturally protected buffer from what's going on in the rest of the world that we all can take advantage of. But it is a relatively short period of time. And my father is a Methodist minister, and so he talked a lot about 7 good years and 7 lean years. These are the good years, my friends. We need to take advantage of these years, but we also need to remember that admission that if it's a good year, you need to save more than you spend, because this too will change. And that's really going to be the challenge of the next few years. We're going to see more and more money come here, more and more investment come here, more and more both good and bad money come here that we can use and we can put into projects that will make you guys really happy and make this next Christmas even better. But we have to understand that this is a relatively short-term phenomenon. I'll show you why in a couple of minutes. The Chinese were going crazy in saving money. They were. They're now spending more than they're saving. And so it went up to $4 trillion in foreign exchange reserves. They're now down to $3.5 trillion, and the number is getting smaller and smaller. Now, the good news, they still have cash that they can spend that they've saved. The bad news is they're drawing that cash down. It's like China became suddenly baby boomers in the stock market. Okay? You know, I'm a baby boomer. And I've decided, I tried two summers ago to retire for about 3 months, went nuts, and I said, I'm not going to retire. And I was talking to one of my colleagues, and he said, yeah, it doesn't make sense, you know. All of our friends who retire after a half year, they start working again for nothing, for free. And so if I'm going to, yeah, it's called nonprofit work. She's looking at me saying, why would you ever do that? Well, I don't know why you'd ever do that. So if I'm going to work at my market rate, I'm going to keep working until, you know, I stop working. At that point, I'll figure out retiring. But we know the problem with baby boomers. There are 10,000 of us who retire every day. And as we leave the money-making employed market, we start pulling savings and money out of the stock market. We start selling assets. We start downsizing. Think about a country of 1.4 billion that's starting to make that transition. You start to understand why we have a ways to go with our economy. But Donald has said he's going to be more disciplined about trade. And he's going to start off with looking at China and Mexico and the EU. I support that. I have international students, and they get really upset with me, and they said, well, what about our jobs? And what about our country? For example, in India, to stay at break even, they need to generate 1 million new jobs a month, every month. And so my Indian students said, well, what about us? And I said, the job of the President of the United States is not to protect the interests of the people of India. It's to first protect the interests of the people of the United States, and hopefully do that in a way that's good for other countries. But if we have to choose, what do we do with our families? We take care of our family first, and that's the job of the president. So there is going to be a price to be paid as we change the way things are going, but we have some advantages. And one of them is the Europeans, the Brits, decided to leave the EU with Brexit. And why did they do that? It's because of jobs. In fact, I could retitle my talk to be, it's about the economy, stupid. It's about jobs. Because that's really what it is. If you get rid of all the rhetoric, it's either you're talking about improving our economy and creating jobs, or you're not. And if you are, people are going to be excited. If you're not, people aren't. And that was the bottom behind Brexit. People were seeing it being harder and harder for them to get decent jobs. A lot of the rhetoric was about the vote being anti-Muslim. In fact, the vote wasn't anti-Muslim. It was an anti-immigrant vote. And the immigrants they were most concerned about were Polish immigrants. Because in the past 10 years before Brexit, 1 million Poles had moved to the EU, had moved to the UK, and half of them were working at minimum wage jobs. And so a lot of Brits, older, rural Brits, were saying, our way of life is falling apart. Does that sound familiar? Older, rural Brits. My wife saw an interview of Donald Trump's campaign manager the day after the election on CNN, and she said, very bright, very disciplined woman, and she said something that the press had never reported. The press talked about the fact that the Trump campaign had a very small footprint, didn't have very many people working for it. What the press didn't talk about was where were those few people that they had. What Kellyanne said is that we didn't have many people, but the people we had were in the rural areas of the states we had to flip to win the election. We had people where we needed them to be versus a whole bunch of people in California. We knew we weren't going to get California, so we didn't have anybody there. Okay. Why did Brexit happen? What are implications for us? Youth unemployment in the EU. Spain, 50%. Greece, 49.7%. Croatia, 43.6%. Italy, 42.7%. Portugal, 26.2%. France, 24.5%. I mean, look at these numbers. This is for kids, people 25 and younger. So you graduate from college and you don't have a job. That's not a future that anybody wants to be part of. And that's part of why the folks in the UK were voting, we don't want to be the place where all these folks who can't get a job in their own countries are coming to, because that has an impact on our ability of our college grads to get a job. And look at the taxes. If you think our taxes are bad here, if you are, make sure I can read it, black as a single earner with no children, and you're in Belgium, you're paying 55% income taxes. 55%. You want a piece of that? Do you like that? Do you think that makes sense? France they're going to have an election, and Monsieur Hollande will no longer be the first prime minister of France to be named after another country, Holland. But when he was elected, he had this grand plan. He said, we need more money for the states, and anybody making more than €1 million will give 75% of that to the government in taxes. That's what he said. That's what he tried. And guess what happened? People making over €1 million said bye-bye and left. You had the biggest outflow of wealthy French in recent history since World War II. And they went to the UK, they went to Spain, they went to Switzerland, they went wherever they could. And for real estate brokers, it was great because they left and they said, we're not coming back. This country's crazy. What we know now in 2016, almost 2017, is if you tell people who are doing really well, we're going to suck your money out of you, they'll say, arrivederci, we're out of here. What we know President-elect Trump has said is that he's going to try to reform taxes. What we know Vice President-elect Pence has said, he said, members of Congress, prepare yourself. There's going to be an onslaught of legislation to change a lot of things in the first 100 days. And if they're able to reform our tax system even a little, that can have a big impact on economic growth. A big impact on economic growth. The real question is what happens. And you say, why is this important, Euroscepticism? Look at France. People in France hate the EU more than the people in the UK, and the people in the UK voted out. So here's a prediction. There's a high possibility, I'm not going to say probability, because the French electoral system is very weird. It's French, of course. There's a high possibility. I mean, think about it. So here's how it works. You run, and if you don't win a complete majority, like 51%, there's a second election 2 months later. So you have your first vote and your second vote. And what typically happens is if there's a troublemaker who wins, is the number one person in the first vote, all the parties that lost then conspire to make sure that troublemaker doesn't win the second vote to protect the status quo. There's a woman named Marine Le Pen. She's from a far-right party that is anti-EU. There's a high probability she will be the number one vote getter in the first election. I would be amazed if the establishment allows her to win the second, but if she does, France leaves the EU. And if France leaves the EU collapses. The euro collapses, which is, in the short term, very good for us. Because then some more money and some more people come to the United States. But let's talk about our economy now. If you listen to Democrats and Republicans, the other party is the second coming of all that is evil. If you look at the data with ugly baby glasses, what you see is that with the exception of a short period of time after World War II with Eisenhower, another short period of time during the internet bubble under Bill Clinton, both parties have believed you can spend more than you bring in forever. That's what they believe. That's what the data shows. And we have a saying in Texas that I love. Your actions are making so much noise I can't hear what you're saying. And it's true. Your actions are making so much noise, I can't hear what you're saying. Ugly baby glasses. Look at what they do, not what they say, because that's what counts. It's like your parents saying, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. No, it's going to hurt you more than it hurts me, I'll tell you that. We just say that to make you feel better. And what happened with those two blips? Those are what we call unicorns or outliers. At the end of World War II, what happened? We demobilized our military. We took over our plants, which were manufacturing munitions and planes and tanks, and turned them into consumer products plants. And all of our competitors in Europe and Asia, their plants had been destroyed. So if you wanted something made and manufactured, it had to be made in the United States. And you had all these GIs who had all this money that had been saved because they've been out fighting, and now they could spend their money because you couldn't buy anything before that. And so you had this situation where the government was downsizing, money was coming in faster than the government could figure out how to spend it. Now let's think about when Bill Clinton was president. We had the internet bubble, irrational exuberance, the stock market going crazy. And for those of you who are old enough to remember Y2K, remember Y2K? There will be no access to anything online on the 1st of January 2000 unless we spend a ton of money. At the time I was using Merrill Lynch with their working capital management account. I don't like the idea of going to a commercial bank where they charge you to give them your money, and then they charge you to take your money back from them. I just never thought that made sense. So in late 98, I guess the last quarter of 98, they said, if you're worried about Y2K, don't worry. We are going to spend $75 million to make sure that our computers don't stop. Okay? That made me feel good. And I got to update every quarter. At the end, the last quarter of 1999, the number was somewhere north of $500 million just for one firm. My wife was working at Dell at the time, and she wasn't working at Dell yet, but I had friends working at Dell at the time, and what we saw was companies first said, well, we need to change our software so they can recognize 4 digits instead of 2 digits. And one of my colleagues was one of the designers of the first mainframe software, and he said, there's no way in the 50s that we ever thought the operating systems we were designing in the 1950s would be used at the end of the century. We'd never thought about that. So, memory was scarce, and so we just cut out the 1 and the 9 and just had 50, 51, 52. Well, that became a problem in 1999. And so they said, well, we could spend a bunch of money changing it so that you could recognize 2000. But we're going to do that. Why don't we change everything? Why don't we just upgrade our systems? Let's take out the old computers and put new computers in. So there was just a feeding frenzy of IT spending at the end. And so you had the same thing that happened with Eisenhower. You had the government bringing more money in than they could spend. It wasn't because of leadership. It was because of luck. I'll give you one more example. It's not on this chart. When Google went public, as all IPO companies do, they had a lockup for their employees, which means for the first 6 months, their employees could not sell stock. In the month when the employees' lockup ended, California state taxes from Google employees selling their stock were equivalent to half of the tax revenue for the state of California. One company. Another way of looking at it, there's a hedge fund manager who was living in New Jersey, and one day he woke up earlier this year and he said, New Jersey has a state income tax. Florida doesn't. I'm making $3 billion. Why am I still in New Jersey? And so he moved. One guy moved, and it resulted in the shortfall for the state of New Jersey of $300 million in taxes. One guy. Okay? So this is what happens, and you need to look at the data and say, I don't think we're going to get politicians credit for anything except this. We'll give them credit for this. Spending below the line. Let's keep going. Well, here's where it gets really interesting. I was talking with one of your colleagues, and he was giving me a hard time. I love people to give me a hard time. Makes me feel like my wife's around. I guess a number of you know what I'm talking about. That's what marriage is good for, keeping you honest. If you look at these numbers, it's President Obama's last proposed budget. A third for Social Security, unemployment, and labor, 28% for Medicare and health, 15% for the military, and then a number most of us don't think about, 7% for interest on the debt. In his budget proposal for the previous year, interest on the debt was 6%. You say from 6 to 7, that's just 1%, 100 basis points. Who cares? When you're talking about $4.2 trillion, 1% is a lot. But it gets more interesting. The futures markets for 3-month treasuries, Eurodollar deposits, are projecting a 4 to 5 to 6 to 7x increase in the cost of interest. We know Janet Yellen has said she's probably going to increase interest rates. I'm not worried about Janet. I'm looking at the market. The Fed does political things. The market does what it thinks is going to happen. And the market is suggesting that our interest rates are going to go up significantly over the next 5 to 7 years. And that's rational. We have lived in a very unusual, atypical, low interest rate environment for a long, long time. And if you don't walk around with these glasses, what you know is that's not sustainable. So here's my question to you. You're bright people. You're in real estate. You know how important interest rates are to growth or lack of growth. What happens to this if this is halfway accurate? Does it go up or go down? Goes up. So here's the next question. Where does it come from? Where does it come from? Now you see why ugly baby glasses are unpopular. Does it come from defense? It can come a little. But what if you just have to double the amount of money you pay for interest on the debt? Because this is not talking about a doubling. Oops, get my numbers right. There we go. This is not a doubling. This is talking about more than doubling. Where's it come from? Those are the decisions that we have to make. Those are the decisions that resulted in Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump being so popular. Because our politicians have continued to kick the can, I almost said the wrong thing, down the road. Why is that important? Oops, what have I done here? This is not working, my dear. I've lost control. Just press escape. Just press escape. I can see something on the screen that you guys can't see. Now it should work. There we go. Look at this data. This is from the United States Department of Treasury. There's a link down there so you can go and check it yourself. China owns $1.157 trillion of our treasuries. When you add Taiwan and Hong Kong, which I like to call wholly owned subsidiaries, that's $1.54 trillion of our treasuries. Why is that important? The President Obama's proposed budget has about a $485 billion deficit. So they're financing us. Here's another issue. We go back to May of 2008, China was at $506 billion. Now they're at $1.1 trillion. What happens to the cost of interest in our country, federal funds rate, if the Chinese say, we have decided that we're going to go back to 2008 levels of ownership of U.S. treasuries? What happens to the cost of interest? If the number one purchaser, foreign purchaser of our interest, of our treasury says we're not buying anymore, does it go up or down? Goes up. What we know is that in the past 4 months, China has reduced its rate of purchasing of U.S. treasuries already by $100 billion, and the trend line is going down. Now, they're not going to say we're just going to bail out of the U.S. dollar immediately because they have a lot of exposure. But the trend line is very clear. All of these numbers from these foreign purchasers of our debt have been trending down. And look at what we've been doing. This is as of 1 a.m. this morning. 1980, less than $1 trillion of debt. 1990, 3.1. Today, $19.84 trillion in debt. And if we continue to spend at the rate we're going, it's over $22 trillion in just 4 more years. The room is suddenly very quiet. And it should be. We have to solve this problem. We have to take this very seriously. We can't be a Greece or a Mexico and Argentina and say, we're not going to pay. Because if that happens, the whole world is plunged into a depression. And so the time to pay the piper is here. If you think about what the Democrats say, well, we need some income redistribution, raise taxes, and that gives us more money to pay it. The traditional Republican response is, let's just cut the size of government down to anything. But you saw my chart. Let me see if I can go back to it without hurting myself. Where do you cut? You can cut the entire federal budget to zero. That's $4 trillion. We owe $19 trillion. As we like to say in Texas, that dog don't hunt. It just don't. And those ducks don't fly either. I love Texas. I'm from California, and I got all these great things to say. I go back to California and look at me strangely, and I look at them strangely because they really are strange there, but that's another issue. What we have to do is, yes, we want our government to be as efficient as possible, and to the degrees we can downsize it, let's downsize it. If you've ever been to Mississippi, you know what happens when you're a low-tax, low-service environment. Or New Jersey, when you're a high-tax, low-service environment. We have this community of marriage. My wife works at Samsung, as I told you, and we were talking last night as she was driving back from New York, and I heard a bam! I said, what the heck happened? I just hit a pothole. I said, we better check. And then the low tire pressure light went on immediately. She hit a pothole that was so bad on a New Jersey major highway that it broke her tire. Unfortunately, it was a run-flat tire. So she was able to get to the dealer in the morning and say, we got to replace this. Split down the side. And they have high taxes, which is why Mercedes-Benz just moved from New Jersey to Atlanta. There's nothing worse than being charged a lot of money and having the worst roads in America. I mean, literally the worst roads. I mean, filled with potholes. But that's another issue. Then we have this, and I have some good news for you, and it's going to come. But I'm an ugly baby glasses person first. Let's look at the data. We have a robotics, artificial intelligence revolution that is changing everything. We most are aware of it with Uber and self-driving cars that are going to come. Well, this guy is one of the most successful venture capitalists in America. And he says 80% of the jobs, the work that doctors do, is going to be replaced by technology. And that initially sounds really strange unless you've ever had prostate cancer surgery. And you're looking at me saying, why is he talking about that? So I will tell you why. It is a cancer that you can survive, very high rates of survival if it gets treated. And sometimes you have to have an operation. And the key thing about the operation, if the surgeon is very precise, things are fine, the cancer is gone, and you are fine. If the surgeon makes a mistake, well, the cancer is gone. And even Viagra won't help you. So it's kind of, for guys, it's kind of like a big thing. Kind of like a big thing. You don't think, you think it's funny. Well, guess what? It's a big thing for us. It's kind of like, you're going to be what? You're going to snip what? Well, with robotic technology now, the state of the art for prostate surgery cancer is for a robot guided by the surgeon to do the work. And robots don't sneeze. Robots don't say, oops. And so the error rate, stop laughing at us, it's scary, you know. The error rate for prostate cancer is collapsed. Now think about what happens when you go to your doctor or you go to a nurse. They start asking you a series of questions. Where does it hurt? When did it start hurting? What have you done? What have you not done? What is that? It's all lookup table. They have a database. Based on what you say, they can narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow it down to this, okay, based on what you've said and the tests we've run, we think the most likely reason you're having problems is that you're insane, or whatever it is. Software can do that just as good, and software doesn't quit. Software doesn't forget. It's not just the medical profession. What we're seeing is, even with the making of PCs and Internet of Things and routers, our economy is moving more and more towards software. And software does not hire as many people. You don't need as many people. And many of the people who are programmers and are hired to design software are not really normal anyway, but that's another issue. It's a real revolution that's unlike anything we've seen. Here's a perfect example. These are unicorns. These companies went public, over $1 billion. They don't hire many people. If you have them in your portfolio is looking really good. But if you think about this election in Middle America, these jobs aren't in Middle America. Now, I do have a friend in Mandela, North Dakota, which most of you have never heard of, who has created a software company that's doing really well for people who want to stay in the upper Midwest. They don't want to go to the East or the West Coast. And he's doing really well. But he's rare. And by the way, the people in North Dakota don't like the fact that people snicker at them. They say, I mean, good grief, we're south of all of Canada. Oh, forget my jokes. But look at the jobs that are being targeted by artificial intelligence and robotics. At the top of the list is one that we don't mind, called telemarketers. If they're going to lose their jobs, unless it's your daughter, fine. But look at number 2, accountants and auditors. Let's go back to my lookup table. A balance sheet's supposed to balance. Your bookkeeping is pretty straightforward. Why do you need humans to do it? In fact, if you look at this list, the only jobs that are absolutely completely protected are recreational therapists. I'm seeing some strange smiles here, but we will not point at anybody. And I hope that's not what you want to do with your next career. But this revolution is a national revolution. This is real. You heard it from me, maybe not first. Take it very seriously. This is a real revolution. So let's keep going. We can do better. I believe, because I've traveled now, worked in 30 countries, traveled about 45 countries. There's no question this is the best country on the planet. And as one of the people I talked with earlier today said, because of 3 things: rule of law, rule of law, rule of law. If we have a contract and there's a dispute, in the overwhelming majority of cases, the legal system is going to make a decision based on what the contract says. And there are so many countries where that's not true. We take it for granted, thank heavens. Let's continue to take it for granted. Let's make sure it works. But look at what's happening. The gap between what we are sending to Germany and what they're sending to us is getting larger. Why? Don't tell me we can't make a BMW 1 Series or a Volkswagen diesel that pollutes. We can do that. We can do a better job. And we have to. If you watched the football game last night, the college football game, Louisville, when they came in number 5th in the playoff, their players were tweeting, "What an injustice. They don't know anything about football." And then at the end of the first half, they were behind 31-0. They lost 36-10. They're not going to be tweeting anything, I suspect. Our ability to grow our economy is at the heart of our ability to solve our debt problem. And that's going to require all of us, but especially people in this room, to focus on what do we do to grow faster. How do we get our GDP up from 1.25% to 1.5% to 3 or 4%? If we can do that, we start to self-correct many of the problems and the challenges that we have. And I have zero doubt that we can make things that are just as good as the Germans. Have you been to Germany? They're very exciting people. They really are. We can do this. We can do this. I mean, look at this. California, the state that I escaped from. Look at this, California. Only 5 countries have a GDP larger than California. If you think the state of fruits and nuts literally is the 6th largest economy in the world, y'all from Georgia have no excuse. I mean, really. We have the ability to do amazing things. Now I'm sounding like the Donald, right? To do amazing things if we are willing to believe in ourselves. In ourselves, not the government. Another example. These are companies that are valued at more than $1 billion. We call them unicorns. We're a unicorn machine. It is something that is special about us. Nobody else can touch us. And if we have an environment that says, y'all do more of this, it can turn the growth of our economy around so fast it's not funny. We have to support it. And when I say we as business people, and we as citizens, and we as voters. We have to repeatedly tell our elected politicians, we want you to support growth. We want you to make sure the government is as efficient as possible. We want fairness and equity in our legal system. But growth is the solution to many of our problems, because it's the only solution. You can't tax yourself out of this problem, and you can't cut spending enough to solve the problem. We have to increase the rate of growth, and we can do it. So here's one of my final slides, because I want to make sure we have time for questions. We're actually doing reasonably well. I'm going fast. That's surprising. I went to my 35th reunion at Harvard Business School in September. And the dean had this slide, which is why it looks kind of strange, because I took a picture with my smartphone and then cut it and pasted it and put it up here. But MIT had come out with a report a few years ago saying that the companies created by their graduates had generated $1.9 trillion in revenue, 4.6 million employees. So these are 30,000. And Harvard likes to compete with MIT, and they said, well, let's look at our other competitors. And they looked at Stanford, $2.7 trillion by 39, almost 40,000 companies created by Stanford grads, 5.4 million people working at it. Harvard overall, $3.69 or 67 trillion dollars, 133,000 companies, 18 million people. At Harvard Business School, $2.4 trillion dollars, 43,000 companies, 10 million people. These are 4 schools. What's the number for Georgia Tech or for the University of Georgia? This is what we do better than any place else in the world. I've taught in Thailand, in Austria, in Mexico, in Japan, where else? In Malaysia, Singapore, in Taiwan. And I can tell you, we have the best graduate school system and the most demanding undergraduate school system on the planet. We do, which is why this year we passed a milestone. More than 1 million foreign students are studying at our universities. Of course, we like them because they don't get in-state tuition. That's really kind of cool. They're coming here for a reason. And when I talk to my German students, they say, John, you're really weird for a professor. We're not used to this. You actually care about us as students. You have office hours where you actually want people to show up. And you talk to us. In Germany and a lot of other places, all you have to do is pass the exams. And some of my German students say, we show up at the beginning to make sure we know what the assignments are, and the next time we show up is at the last day of class to take the exam. And if we pass the exam, we move on. And that's not how it works here. And that's one of the things that makes us special. And that's what we can build on. One of the things I'd like to recommend to the Georgia chapter of the CCIM is you work with the folks from Georgia Tech to come up with their version of this. And then you market the heck out of this. What I heard from one of your members is that you now have this little technopolis developing around Georgia Tech as more and more companies are saying kids want to be close to a place that's cool and a place that's innovative. And Georgia Tech is both. Even if you're a Georgia fan, it's both. It's a cool place. But if you don't tell people about it, if people don't know about it, guess what? They can't take advantage of it. There's also been a conversation about immigrants. So tell me which one of these companies you don't want to have. Oh, I need you to hit escape again right next to you. Every once in a while I push something and it gets all excited. 7 of the 8 largest tech companies in America were founded by co-founded by first or second generation immigrants. If you take companies founded by first or second generated immigrants out of NASDAQ, you take 40% of NASDAQ and throw it in the dustbin. I got some brilliant students from all over the world who are getting MBAs from a top 20 MBA program who are desperate to stay here and help grow our economy, and they're crying about not being able to get the opportunity to do that. So think about what we're doing and whether or not this makes any sense. We're getting people educated from K through college by another country at that country's expense, at their parents' expense. They then come here and want to stay and help grow our economy, and we're telling them, go back home and compete with us. I know that makes sense to somebody. Not to me. So here's a data point. Ugly baby glasses. If you take all of the foreign students out of our engineering schools across this country, Mexico produces more Mexican engineers than the United States produces American engineers. It's too hard. It's math. I don't want to do it. It is my hope that we eventually can produce children who think math and STEM and engineering is fun, but in the interim, if we get rid of all of our international students who are doing the work and running our factories, guess what? It ain't going to look pretty. In fact, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal about a manufacturing facility in Maine that is recruiting employees to work in this facility from the asylum seekers shelter. That's the only people they can find. That's the only people they can find. So let's deal with another ugly baby data fact. Opiates and suicides have been rising in Middle America. We got a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities, but the most important thing is that we represent a beacon of hope everywhere. And I'm going to end so we can have Q&A with a slide from southern China. And of course you can read it because it's in Mandarin, right? But fortunately they have a translation. And the translation is, time is money, efficiency is life. This is in Shenzhen, a little city of 15 million people that you probably never heard about, across the border from Hong Kong in the People's Republic of Communist China. Time is money, efficiency is life. When I first found this sign, took a picture of it, I was talking to some of my Chinese students and said, oh yeah, we've seen this. They used to have them, signs like this in our schoolrooms. What do you think the ACLU would say if we put a sign like that up in a public square? What are the chances they're going to be in any schoolroom? What's wrong with that picture? My friends, I'm here to tell you this is the greatest time to be American. There's so many great opportunities for us, but we as business people have been asleep at the switch. There are only 8 states in the United States that require kids to learn about business and finance before they graduate. But every state requires you to know about the history of your state. So in Texas, there was an Alamo, and we lost. And we got irritated, and then we won. Well, that's really cool stuff. But do you know how to open a bank account? Do you know how people make money? Do you know how people make profit? Is profit a good word or a bad word, or does it just start with P? We think we can continue our economy without making an investment and making sure that our kids understand how business works. Not just your kids and my kids, because they don't have any choice, but the folks who grow up in families that don't have business people in them. This is a great time for us to take ownership of this country. The voters have sent a message. The message is we are upset with the status quo. I'll use that word. And we are hoping that Donald Trump can change things, but if he can't change things, we'll find somebody else. And we're going to keep trying and trying, because we first voted for Barack Obama, now we're voting for Donald Trump. We don't really care who the messenger is, what he or she looks like. We only care about one thing, that they take what's happening in this country seriously and try to make things better. And the people who need to lead that revolution are you and I. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Now, the good news is we have some time. For those of you who need to leave and make some money, I understand that. But we have some time for Q&A, and there's a microphone that's going to be circulating. So if you have any questions, they can be on anything. Yes, sir. Let's get the mic over there to the left. He's ready. So we have a couple people. But they can't hear you on the video. And while Kelly is carrying the mic, I want to tell you, I've done this a lot. Kelly is amazing. She's efficient. She's organized. She's polite. And she's enough of a you-know-what to make sure that I get places on time. So you are lucky to have Kelly. She's special. Yes, sir.
I had concurred with your view about the robotic changes in the coming decades. And as a result of that, I'm curious to see what you think about what's going to happen with the office market in particular as robots take all these positions in America.
Okay, so the question is, what happens to office space as the robotics revolution pops up? So let me give you an idea of how significant this change is going to be. General Motors is investing in Lyft and Uber for driverless cars, and we know Google and everybody else is coming up with driverless cars technology. What does that mean? We already have trucks on the road that don't have drivers. They're driverless trucks. We already have buses on the road and cars on the road. It is estimated that within the next 10 years, most long-haul trucks will be autonomous trucks, where there'll be a robot driving it and not a driver. And there's some good benefits of it because they don't fall asleep. But that's 1.5 million long-haul driver jobs that disappear. And then taxi jobs that disappear. And then a lot of other jobs that disappear. So think about it. Most of us use our cars, unless you're a real estate agent and you're taking people around. Most Americans use their cars about 3% of the time they own the car. So think about what happens if Uber says, we'll have a vehicle at your house or your workplace within 3 minutes. It'll take you wherever you want to go, and then when you want to leave, another one will be within your workplace within 3 minutes. And the cost of transport or owning that car will be cut by 30 or 40%. How many of us are going to buy a car? And oh, by the way, your smartwatch or your smart phone will connect with the car and it'll say, "Hi, John," or "Hi, Paul," and completely configure that vehicle to you while you're there, and then when you get out, it does it to the next person. That's coming. And so for office buildings, there's some cool things about it. It means there are far fewer vehicles on the road. Now, this is going to take about 10 to 15 years, but my job is what's coming down the road. But if you're in the parking construction business, parking lot construction business, we don't need as many parking lots because these vehicles are just circulating. They're circulating. They're being used much more efficiently. If you're building gas stations, near the end, Jiffy Lubes, near the end, car wash, near the end, car dealerships, near the end. That's 10, 15 years coming. Big highways. Atlanta will finally have decent traffic when this is over. So there's some good thing coming out of that. But for office buildings, it'll be a lot easier for people to go where they want to be. And as we're seeing, even with the traffic you have in downtown Atlanta, how many new buildings are going, office buildings are going up in the Central Business District? We're seeing the same thing in Austin. These kids born in 98, 99, and 2000, they want to be where it's cool and hip, and they think being downtown is cool and hip. And so they're going to go downtown. And so I see a real change in two things happening. There's going to be more office space, and it's going to be more cost effective because less of that space will need to be used for parking garages because fewer people have cars. So overall, for your industry, it's going to be really cool, but for some other industries, it's going to be a real transition. Next question. Yes, sir. Kelly's moving fast. I'd ask her to throw the mic, but it might hurt somebody.
John, again, thank you for being here. Just terrific as always. But I'm in the senior housing business, and we have two different color glasses. One is the great fun thing, 10,000 people turn 65 every day and whatnot. But the ugly baby glasses of our industry is that the senior population will double in the next 20 to 25 years. But this is the baby boom generation. It's the first generation without pensions. They don't have enough money. And no one wants to talk about that. That's one of my big concerns. I'm trying to figure that out. What are your thoughts on that?
So the question is, what do we do about the fact that there are going to be more and more elderly people who need a place to live and they can't afford it? I mean, the data is really very clear. If you look at people in their mid-50s, depending on what data set you look at, anywhere between 60 to 70% of them have less than $10,000 in savings. And they have no pension. So their only way of surviving is Social Security. When you look at people whose net worth is less than $100,000, who are on the verge of retiring in the next 5 to 10 years, that's about 75% of those folks. Now you can philosophically say, well, it's their fault. But it's a numbers game. And if we are religious people, whatever your religion is, one of the things our religions tell us is we need to take care of those who can't take care of themselves, especially seniors. So we are facing, not just in this country, but all around the world where you're seeing this increase of older people because health care is getting better and people are living longer. How do we address their challenge? And I think, Milton Friedman, who's not viewed as a left-wing radical, he's actually a very conservative economist, decades ago talked about a negative income tax. He said, I'm willing to make a deal with you, America, get rid of all the social safety nets that are founded by the government and have a negative income tax, which he said everybody gets $20,000, and then if they make more money, they get to keep 2/3 of what they make or 3/4 of what they make until they get to break even, and then they are taxpayers. The tax rate is lower. But in exchange for that, we get rid of all the welfare programs. Because if you think about America before the Great Society, churches and nonprofits and charities did really good work. And then we came up with all these programs where the government would do the work, and what happened? Well, if the government's going to do it, why not? So we are going to have to address this issue as a people because it's only going to get more severe. There are way too many people retiring who simply cannot afford anything. And Social Security is, I think the max you can get if you've made a ton of money is $4,000 a month. But for a lot of people on Social Security, you're looking at $1,500 to $2,000 a month for everything. That's a real challenge. And we can solve it, but we're going to have to solve it by doing what we used to do before the government, quote, the government did everything, which is taking care of our communities. Okay? It's a great question. Yes, sir. Put on your track shoes next time, young lady. It's hard to run. I actually saw a woman trying to run in high heels. It was a scary sight.
Thank you. Food. The beckoning population of the world, and America being the breadbasket of the world, that's why we're migrating here, I think, originally. How important is that going to be in the next 20, 30 years feeding the world?
So the question is, how do you feed the world? Food security. Here's a data point that most people don't know. The European Union uses 40% of its budget to pay farmers not to grow food. 40%. It keeps prices high. It's not market-based. That's one of the many reasons they're crazy, and I hope they die. And you can quote me on that. Although that's not the official position of the University of Texas or the Board of Regents, it's just my personal position. I don't like socialism, period, end of conversation. I've been to too many countries where I've seen what it's done to the economy, and, it's like, niet, kill it. Okay. We have the ability to produce more than enough food for the world's population forever. The problem is not our productive capacity. The problem is our policies and whether or not they have the ability to buy it. So I used to do some work for our government overseas, and there's a program we have called Food for Peace. And so if there's a famine or people have a problem in country X, Y, or Z, we'll air freight in tons of milk and cheese, powdered milk and cheese and butter and other things, and we'll give it to them for free. And that sounds really cool, unless you're a business person. How do you compete with free? And so when we're airdropping all that stuff, what we're doing is undermining the ability of the local agribusiness community to compete. And oh, by the way, where do we get all that stuff? We're paying farmers in America. If they produce more than the market wants, we'll buy it from them, and then we'll store it, and then we'll give it to other countries for free. What we have to do is we have to go back to a market-based economy on food. That's scary, because that means people in the Caribbean and South America who make sugar at a much lower cost than sugar beet manufacturers here, they have the ability to sell the sugar here. And so we have to decide, do we really believe in capitalism? What I found is that most Americans give lip service to it. They don't. In fact, most humans don't, which is why you have more and more people who are against globalization and global trade. Because what that means is that whoever can produce it cheaper is successful. And we're not really good at producing sugar because we use sugar beets. We don't have many places where there's sugar cane. We have the ability to feed everybody. Now, here's another thing that's going on. It's really kind of fascinating. These are hydroponic, greenhouse, all year long farms. They're now starting to pop up, including urban farms. They're now starting to pop up in warehouses where they have the ability to produce higher cost, but also higher margin products 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, regardless of what's happening outside in warehouses. And I think some of you, if you haven't seen it, you're going to eventually start to see folks saying, we have some really high-end products that we want to produce, that we want to grow, and we want your warehouse. We want to use it in your warehouse. Now, in Colorado, we know what those high-end products are. It's called the My High City for different reasons now. And I'll tell you, I had a slide on that. I pulled it out because I thought it was too controversial. I think the worst thing that's happening in this country is people think that you can get as high as you want to, and there's nothing wrong with it. There are consequences. What we know for sure about pot, I know this is not a food, but some people actually eat this stuff, is if you smoke pot a lot, it weakens your heart muscles. What are the implications of that? Especially for young guys and gals who are toking all the time. Everything has consequences. But yeah, food is something that's going to be a great opportunity, both inside and outside. And if we create a food policy that says we're going to stop subsidizing farmers for not growing food, we're going to create an environment that supports the growing of food and the exporting of food, we're going to have a lot of work to do for the rest of our lifetime and then some. Okay? Any other questions? How are we doing on time? We're getting close. Any other questions? I want to thank you for having me back. Most people have enough sense not to do that. Every once in a while they do that, and I'm just delighted about that. But you guys represent a very important part of the economy, not just of Atlanta, but of Georgia. But that's not going to be enough. The American people have thrown a brick through the wall of the system. They said, listen to us. Work with us to fix this system. We can do it if we take ownership of it. It is our responsibility. It's not somebody else's responsibility. It's definitely not some government bureaucrat's responsibility. If we take ownership of making this country better, of fixing some of the problems that I've shared with you, of taking advantage of all the opportunities that we have, there's nothing that we can't do. And so thank you very much for having me, and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Again, thank you, John, very much. Great presentation. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you next year.